Okay, so what I have here is a tea that actually most people have never heard of before. So this is Tencha, and it's actually not a tea that's typically drunk. It's actually used to make matcha or powdered tea. So you may have heard us talking about before how matcha is essentially a type of powdered green tea, but it needs to be made from special leaves. Well, these are those special leaves. So these are shaded tea leaves. They're typically made from the top 3 to 5 sprouts of the tea plant, and they have their stems and veins removed before they're ground into a fine powder like matcha. So if we take a look at the leaves here, you'll notice it's very much unlike any other type of Japanese tea. You have these tiny little light fluffy leaves. What you won't see here is the stems or the veins. So this is very peculiar for a Japanese green tea, because normally, even with gyokuro, which is kind of premium green tea, it's not meant to have many stems in it at all. You still will notice some of these lighter yellow stems, and with this tea, you're not going to really see any of them. So this is going to have an impact on the flavor, but more importantly, it's going to make it produce a better matcha. So this is really not meant to be drunk. I've actually spoken with some tea shop owners in Japan, and they recommend that you actually use this as a seasoning, almost like oregano or something. It actually kind of looks like oregano. And actually, I did take a little bit of a pinch, and it is actually quite flavorful. It tastes a little bit like, almost like nori. It does have a little bit of that kind of vegetal. It has a tiny bit of umami to, you know, whatever you might be eating. Definitely something I might keep around and play around with later. But for right now, it seems a little bit too precious. I kind of just want to drink it because it is a little bit of a pricier tea if you can find it, and it is difficult to find. But what we're going to do here is we're going to compare a cup of Tencha tea to a cup of matcha, or a little less than a cup of matcha. And we're going to see how even though these are made from seemingly similar leaves, so this is the whole leaf form and this is the powdered form, the delivery of these teas is very different. So that's going to make the flavor completely different. So one is going to be mixed directly into water, and the other is going to be infused into water, like a typical green tea. So let's go ahead and prepare these. First, what I'm going to do is sift the matcha powder. So this is something that's important to remove the clumps in the matcha, because matcha is a really fine powder, obviously, and when it's exposed to the humidity in the air, it tends to form these little clumps that don't mix so evenly into the water. It doesn't mean that you got a bad matcha. Some people seem to think that. It's just something that kind of happens. Okay, so once you have a finely sifted layer of powder on the bottom of your tea bowl, so this is actually the gray chawan that we sell at neoteas.com. We have, I think, 9 total different types of tea bowls that you can choose from right now. So go ahead and take a look, and you can pick one that matches your style. But this is the one I'm going to be using today. It does seem a little bit small, but it's actually the perfect size for this quantity of tea that I'm going to be doing today. So I'm going to go ahead and add water at a temperature of about 70 degrees Celsius. So I'm going to be using very little water here. And so you don't need a bamboo whisk to make matcha, but it definitely makes the process much easier and much more pleasant, because those metal whisks can make a ton of noise, and they actually don't produce as much of a foam as the bamboo whisk. Plus, it's kind of fun to use the traditional matcha whisk. You see here I have a nice foam on top. You want these smaller bubbles, which kind of gives a light and airy texture to the tea and a smoother taste. So I used 1 gram for this. Normally I would use 2 grams and actually make a little bit more, but this is kind of almost like a matcha shot. Normally you use 2 grams for 100 milliliters of water. This I used like 1 gram for maybe a little less than 50 milliliters of water, because I didn't want to use a ton of matcha powder, but I wanted to make sure that the flavor was dense. So now we're going to prepare this just like we would any other leaf tea. I'm gonna be using about 70 degrees Celsius water again, so same temperature. And approximately 150 milliliters. So it's gonna be more water. I'm gonna let this brew for 1 minute. Okay, so you see there's a huge difference in, obviously, the volume of the two teas. This is way more liquid. Also the color of the two teas. So even though these are really made out of the same leaves, because we're just extracting the leaves, in the case with the Tencha loose leaf brewing, you're getting a much lighter color. With the matcha, it's not really an extraction, it's more of a suspension. You're kind of mixing the matcha powder directly into the water. So this has implications when it comes to the flavor of the tea, the color of the tea, the thickness of the tea, and also the health benefits of the tea, because you're getting more of that leaf. Whereas with this one, you're just getting a small little piece of the leaf, basically. You can see, obviously, all the leaves are still inside the teapot, whereas if this were, ground into a powder and mixed directly into water, I would be drinking all those leaves in there, essentially. So let's go ahead and compare the flavor of these two. First with the Tencha. Yeah, you would think that this tea would taste more like a gyokuro because it's long shaded, it's kind of carefully produced and selected, made through a similar production process, but it actually definitely tastes more like a sencha. So it has a little bit of this light citrusy flavor, a tiny bit of, not astringency, but this kind of freshness, this kind of fresh citrusy flavor profile. And it's got kind of a nice warm sweetness to it. But I think what's really standing out is it does have this kind of almost like spirulina, kind of almost seaweedy flavor to it. That's really interesting. That sets this apart from all the other Japanese green teas I've had before, is that kind of that spirulina note. Let's go with the matcha. Wow. Much more intense, obviously, much thicker, and much more flavorful. So I don't really have a lot here, but people have said that I use too much water in the matcha, so I'm trying to play around with less water, more powder. And this is really almost like just like an espresso shot of matcha. But I really like it. It's much more flavorful, much bolder. There is more bitterness to it, which you're gonna get. This is actually not a matcha we sell, by the way. It's a little bit lower grade for my taste. But you're gonna end up with more bitterness overall when you consume it in a powdered form versus with an extraction like this one. But you're definitely gonna get more flavor overall. So this one has much more of a powerful flavor to it. It has more of that bold umami. It does have more of that seaweedy note, but here it's more of a, it's gonna sound really bad, but it almost tastes like algae or something. Like it makes this tea sound really bad. But I really noticed this kind of spirulina, this really green, slightly grassy, almost marine flavor profile. This is what I get from the Tencha, and with the matcha, it's just more of a kind of bold steamed vegetable umami, and then definitely some bitterness in the finish. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you want to pick up some matcha tea, this one is a little bit too bitter for our assortment, but there's some great ones that you can find at neoteas.com. We've been traveling around Japan for the past few years, meeting with farmers and looking for the very best teas to share with all of you with free shipping worldwide. So definitely check that out, and stay tuned for the next tea tasting.